Like she said, I'm Alan Michael Grace, and this presentation, although it's my work, it's both professional and personal for me. I have 3 kids. I have 2 adult kids, a 25-year-old, a 22-year-old, and don't judge me, I have a 3-year-old too. And I work for the Children's Institute, have been there for about 12 years, and the agency itself provides mental health services for families who have been affected by trauma. And we've been doing that for about 110 years. But the last 20 years, we really have placed an effort and an emphasis on make sure that we include father when we say family. Most organizations and most systems, when they say they service families, they really mean mothers and kids. And so we remind them that you have to include father if you're really going to say family, right? In some cases, father's not there, but in a lot of cases they are. I usually start the presentation off with a couple disclaimers. One, I am the grandson of a Baptist preacher, and when I start feeling it, I start to sweat. I'm not going to pass out. It's all good. You're going to see me take off my jacket in a few minutes because I get into it, right? The other is I curse just a little bit, but it's in context to the program and the population that we serve, right? So don't be offended, and I'm not doing it just to be vulgar, right? And then the last, actually there's 2 more. I was raised by a single mother. I think she did a fantastic job. But I say that to say that you'll hear me talk a lot about men and a lot about fathers and advocating for fathers, but this program is really about kids. And so we use fathers as a medium to make sure that kids have positive outcomes or try to increase their outcomes, right? So we're very pro-women and we're very pro-systems. We just teach fathers how to navigate the two for the outcomes of the kids, right? So with that said, is there a clicker? So I usually like starting off with some statistics. And most people have heard this, but it really doesn't ring to unless it's in front of you. For a child who does not have a father figure, and I say father figure because I don't want people to get hung up on biological dads. Like I said, I was raised by a single mom, and then when I was 13, I got a stepdad who was a wonderful person. And my mom did the best that she could to raise me in the manner that she could. But make no mistake, if my father was around when I was younger, I would have had a different set of tools in my tool belt to navigate life, right? Through the military, through college, dealing with girls, all these different things throughout my life. I would have had a different set of tools to engage, to use to engage things as they appeared. But father figure, when I say fathers, I mean father figures because we have a lot of guys who are uncles raising their kids, older brothers raising their brothers and sisters, grandparents raising their kids. And so I say father figure instead of fathers a lot of the time. But a child who does not have a father figure in their lives are 5 times more likely to be poor, 3 times more likely to fail in school, 3 times more likely to experience behavior problems in school, 2 times more likely to engage in criminal behavior. They're twice as likely to use and abuse alcohol and tobacco. This is how I recruit most of my participants. I say, if you are not involved in your daughter's life, she's 4 times more likely to engage in early sexual behavior. They're like, where do I sign up, right? And then they're 3 times more likely to commit suicide. So with those statistics, we think it's very, very important that we engage fathers and we let them know how important it is that they're involved in their child's life. And the reason why this is titled from a trauma-informed approach is because we know, specifically with men of color, there's a bias that we'll talk about in a little bit. And I might not have had a traumatic experience, but I approach most situations with a trauma lens, right? I always think, I was raised to think that somebody's out to get me, I have to watch where I'm going, I have to watch what I'm doing. So when I'm coming to somewhere for services or being engaged by someone for services, I am on guard, I'm ready for that traumatic experience. And so if you're really gonna help me, you have to know that I'm gonna be doing that and be prepared to engage me in that way. So I've been doing this work for about 10.5 years. The first couple of years I came to Children's Institute, I was working on policy. And then I moved into working with families. But in the 10 years that I've been there, I've never met a guy who says, I just don't want to be involved in my child's life. I just don't want to be, F it, no, I don't want to be. I've never met that guy. So we've identified over the years 5 reasons why fathers aren't involved. I'll put them all up here. Some of them are self-explanatory, others I'll go into in detail. Poor self-esteem. A lot of guys, specifically in the communities that we serve, they don't have a very high level of education, which can cause some self-esteem issues as pertaining to with their kids. They themselves, under intergenerational component, most guys will come into the program and they'll say, this is the first time I curse, so be ready. They'll say, my granddaddy wasn't shit, my daddy wasn't shit, and odds are I'm not gonna be shit. That's how they come into the program. And so if you're thinking like that even before you have children, I'm sorry. Oh. It sets the stage for how you engage with your children moving on. The next one, I like to use an example of social and psychological isolation. So I have the 3-year-old I told you about, and about a year ago I took him to the doctor, and at the end of the doctor's visit, the doctor said, he has an ear infection and I'm gonna give you some medication. I said, okay, and he said, give me your wife's phone number and I will call her and tell her how to administer the medicine. And I said, okay. I said, I can do it. He said, no, I don't mind, really. Give me your number. I'll call her and I'll tell her how to administer. And I'm like, no, I can do it. This went back and forth. I'm like, dude, I have multiple degrees. I can put 2 drops here and 2 drops here. And he was very insistent. And then I had to catch myself because I started to get pissed off, right? But I caught myself because I realized that he wasn't being a jerk. He wasn't trying to insult me. In his mind, that was not my role. It was mother's role to administer medication, to nurture, to make my son feel better. What he didn't know is that my son doesn't have a single parent. My son doesn't have a mother. So he was very insistent on telling somebody who didn't exist how to administer medication for my child. So I was socially and psychologically isolated from that situation. That happens more than we realize. So it happened to me at the doctor. It happened to me with my older sons when they were in school. The teacher who had been his teacher all year long, still 9 months into the school year, calling home asking for their mother. I'm like, Miss Smith, we've been talking all year long. How are you still asking for their mother? It happens in a variety of different areas, but sometimes fathers feel isolated. I am obviously African American, but in my family, we were told early on that let the women take care of the babies when they're babies. You know, when they get about 1 or 2, you can, take care of them. I remember people in my family, the men in their family going to grab their babies and the mother-in-law, the mother's mother, oh, no, it's okay. You wait till he can hold his head up on his own type of thing. We don't want you to touch that soft spot in the top of his head and kill him or make him cross-eyed by looking at him over his head. All those wise, am I the only one who? And so they isolated him from parenting, but they still want him to be super dad, right? Stress component, I work a lot with child welfare. And a lot of the guys are given multiple things to do. So they might have to go to parenting classes, to anger management, to domestic violence, to substance abuse, maintain a full-time job, spend time with the kids, have a relationship, go to church, all these things in 1 week that half of us have trouble doing without the system involved. And so they're very, very stressed out. And at some point, it's like, it's probably going to be easier for the kid if I just am not involved. Not that I don't want to be, but it'll probably be easier for the kid. And then access. Anybody know what gatekeeping is? So it's where it's similar to what I talked about the mother-in-law. She gatekeeped the father from participating. But most times it happens from the mother, especially if there's some type of relationship problem. The mother will gatekeep, well, if you don't do what I say, you're not going to get to see your son. And so that happens under access a lot. Stop me at any time if I use some terminology that you don't understand or you have questions about something, because I'd love to have a conversation about it. I'm just going to make sure we get everything in the time that we have. So from a trauma-informed approach, we work with men differently than most systems work with women. How many people believe that men and women are different? How many people think that we have to work with men and women differently? Okay, good. So not everybody, so I'm going to teach you how and why. So what most programs do is they have a program that's designed, like I said, most systems are designed to work with women, right? Hello, how are you? So most programs have existing programs, and what they try to do if they're going to work with men is change the pronoun, and then it's a male program, right? So for example, how many people heard of Mommy and Me programs? Well, a lot of organizations will change it to Daddy and Me, change nothing about the curriculum, and then wonder why it's not successful. Because you have to engage men differently than you engage with women. Women have lots of outlets. How many of you ladies in the room have been to part of a girls' night out? Oh, come on, tell the truth. Okay, there you go. Or book club? So we got a couple of guys in the house. You been to a guys' night out? Not just, so, and I'll tell you the difference between a guy's night out and a girl's night out. Ladies, when they get together, they talk about everything. Their relationships, their man, their mothers, their children, their work. When guys get together, we lie. We compare, mine's bigger than yours, I make more money than you. We really just lie because we've been taught that we have to protect our machismo, right? And so we don't, what's your first name?
Sergio.
Sergio and I could have been best friends since we were born. We went to preschool, kindergarten, elementary, all the way up together. And now we're adults and we have kids. But there are some things, as much as we know about each other, there's some things we're never going to talk about. All that warm and fuzzy, icky stuff that makes you feel emotions, we're not going to talk about. We're going to talk about everything else and avoid it. So for example, Sergio might have broken up with his girlfriend. And rather than me, like when females are like, oh, you know, my husband and I broke up, we're going through da-da-da-da, and they'll talk it out, and one will make the other one feel better. Sergio's girlfriend could have left him, but he's going to come to me and say, oh, I left her because she da-da-da-da-da-da. And then he's going to go home and cry, right? So we've created spaces where men can come and deal with those emotions that society has not ever let them deal with, right? So there's 10 core topics that this program facilitates, and it affects all of us. Everybody in the room, I don't care how many degrees you have, how much money you have, all 10 of these topics affect all of us. How many of us don't know anyone who has a substance abuse problem? How many of you don't know anyone who has lost somebody in their life through death or separation, broken up? You don't know anybody who has? No. I think you did. So anyway, that's an example of all of these topics. But unlike other programs where in week 1 you have a curriculum that says in week 1 we're going to do this, and in week 2 you know how they give you an agenda, a syllabus with all the things. In our program, these are the 10 core topics, but they're facilitated based on what's going on in our room. This was one of our groups, and we were checking in today. What's your name, sir? Joshua. Joshua was checking in, and Joshua started talking about a cousin who maybe overdosed on a substance abuse, right? In most programs, because we're in week 3, we're supposed to be talking about normal child development. But in this program, I can't let Joshua leave if we don't address what's bothering him. And so, although the plan for tonight might have been to talk about normal child development, I have to switch that and make sure that Joshua's okay, have everybody else chime in on that, and so we all walk away with an understanding of how substance abuse affects us in our lives. Now, most of the facilitators of these programs have a mental health background, either child development, early childhood education, or mental health therapy, but it's not a requirement. They just have to understand people, because we don't teach anything. Given the opportunity and the safe space, men will talk about things. So although he and I won't talk about things together, if we're in a space that's safe and it's proven to be safe, we'll let loose. Sometimes you can't shut them up, right? So I'm just going to go through a couple of these. Trust and rapport. The other thing about men is we don't trust people at all. Like I told you earlier, even today, with all I know, I go into every situation saying, I was just sharing with Professor Hoffman, that we were talking about a situation, and I said, well, I don't have that luxury, because I go into a situation thinking I have to be better than, somebody's out to get me, somebody's out to take something away from me. And it's not until I've created trust, someone's created some trust and rapport with me, that I'll allow them to get to know me a little bit, right? So in most situations, even in child development, you have an intake process, right? An intake process usually takes anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. Well, in this program, our intake is 3 hours long because I'm not coming in like most people and things, with a checklist and your name and your black and your da-da-da. I'm gonna come in with nothing in my hands, and for the first hour, I'm just gonna get to know Josh. Oh, you went to West LA College? Oh, I have a cousin who went there. Oh, you studied this? Da-da-da. So after that first hour, it's kind of a little, you like me a little bit, right? Yeah. And so you're more likely to participate and open up in a conversation that we have. 96% of the guys who go through our intake end up showing up to the program. Where nationally it's about 57%. So we know that this is something that works. Establishing trust and rapport with a guy, and most of them say at the end of the session, this is the first time that everybody's ever sat and listened to me. Because usually they want to listen to what mom says or what somebody else, because I'm not an authority, right? Child abuse and neglect. You guys are younger, a lot younger than me. So child abuse and neglect look a little different today than it did like when I was younger, right? So my mother used to take off her shoe. It wasn't child abuse, she was just, I was misbehaving, so she had to listen, right? Today, you'll lose your child with BCFS for throwing a shoe and busting him upside the back of the head, right? So we have to explain to guys that child abuse and neglect is different than it was 15 years ago. I remember my mother saying, I'm getting ready to run down to the store to get some taco mix. I'm locking the door, don't you answer the door, I got a code, I'm gonna go let you know it's me, right? So I can come back in. And it was okay, because most people did it. Yeah. Today, you can't do that. You leave that child in the house and somebody hears about it or finds out about it, your child's gone, right? So we really talk to them and explain what that means and what it looks like today. Biggest topic, separation and loss. We don't talk about loss like Surgeon didn't, he lied about his girlfriend. We typically just don't even talk about loss. Grieving, we try to do it in our own way. And what that typically leads to is these two things, if we don't address it in a way that's healthy. It typically leads to substance abuse or some type of domestic violence or child abuse, right? So we create a space where it's okay for us to come in here and cry. I facilitate 26, my team, 26 different groups throughout the week in English, Spanish, and Korean. And every night, at every group, I was in a group last night, some guys breaking down because this is the first time they've gotten a space to talk about something. For me, I'll tell you, my grandma was very, very important. My mother had me when she was 15, so my grandma kind of raised me. So when my grandma passed, it was like my mom had passed. And I had a hard time dealing with it. And that happened probably 10 years ago. And it wasn't until I started going to groups with other men in the room that I was able to really cry. Because even at the funeral, I was the man. I had to pretend like I had it together, make sure my mom was okay. I never got to grieve. And in this space that was created, the safe space that was created through a trauma-informed approach, I was able to then let it go. And I was not only better for myself, but I was then better for my kids. I improved my relationship with my mom because of it. Separation and loss is huge, and we start every group with that topic.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
If I may.
Sure, anytime.
You're talking about creating these safe spaces for men because spaces were not provided for them. Do you find that the people who go through your program then allow for safe spaces in their own circles? Like, do they extend it?
No, not typically.
Really?
No. So I'll come back to that.
Okay.
Because unlike other programs, I'll talk about it now. Unlike other programs that have a date, like you're here for 16 weeks or 12 weeks and then it ends and you graduate, there's no graduation from this program. You don't graduate from being a dad, so you're not going to graduate from our program. It's an open-ended program. We have guys, most of them are instructed or referred or suggested to attend the program anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks, sometimes 16 weeks. We have guys that have been there 10 years. Again, it's a place unlike they've ever seen where I can come, I'm not judged, I'm not labeled, nobody's trying to tell me I'm bipolar, nobody's trying to tell me I'm crazy. I get to talk about things that I don't typically talk about and feel comfortable and supported in doing so. And if they take that out somewhere else,
even to their children, I would
I'm sure they have conversations with their children that are different because of the group.
Right, right.
So this question was asked before, and so someone said, well, if they participated in this group, maybe they would try to start a group themselves, like maybe in their church or something. But what we know is that it's possible, but unlikely, because those spaces then, there's the possibility that things get discussed outside of the group. In the 16 years that the groups have been going, twice has anything ever come out of the group been repeated somewhere else. And both times we went back to the groups and said, hey guys, so if this was our group, I would say, you know, unfortunately, Holly repeated something that was said in group last week. And I need you guys to tell me what you guys want to do about it. It's not my group, this is our group. And the group, both times, they said, you know, she gotta go. Because it's no longer a safe space. Again, we've created something that we love. We miss Monday Night Football, we miss all that to participate in group. And unfortunately, I have to ask Holly, I'll try to get you to go to another group, but in this group, you've broken that confidentiality. That thing that doesn't exist in the outside world that we have here that's special, they want to protect it, right?
And that's something real quick. I think you mentioned it in the first session that I saw that you established kind of like parameters or guidelines to build that groundwork. And so that's something that the group kind of decides upon in terms of like what our expectations are to keep everything. How do you establish that parameter that everything that we say here is confidential and does not go outside?
So we start off in the intake. So again, that's why that 3-hour time period when I'm talking with you, by the end, you kind of trust me, and I have to let you know that this is the kind of thing that's going to happen in our group, but you need to know that everything that happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Everything that happens in our group, aside from, you know, something that as mandated reporters we have to report, it's going to stay in the group, right? And once a guy comes into the group and he hears another guy talk about things that you never expect a guy to be talking about and emotional about it, I think they get it. And again, in 16 years, twice it's been repeated. So they really protect that space. The difference between punishment and discipline. Anybody know what the difference, or take a quick guess what the difference is?
Punishment, you put them like, well, now you put them in like a corner and put a chair there. And but discipline, I mean, this is not allowed anymore. But you'd use rulers for discipline, but that's not allowed, because then you'd have your kids in the Department of Family and Services. So right now, it's, I know the difference between punishment, but not the difference between both.
Okay, so I thought exactly like you did up until literally 3 or 4 years ago, until this was explained to me by a professor who was helping us on child development. Punishment is, so I'll give you the analogy that I like to use with my little boy. If he's 3 years old, if he was over here playing with this outlet and he came over and I hit his hand and say, don't do that, I just punished him, right? But if I came over, took him to the outlet and said, you can't play with this, even if I still hit his hand, you can't play with this because there's electricity here and you can get electrocuted and you can die and daddy would be upset, that was discipline. Because discipline is a teachable moment. You have to have they have to learn something from discipline. If you just spank, even spanking, because you know, spanking is still legal despite what people think, even just a spanking, that's punishment. Unless there's some learning behind them getting their spanking. And not just, you know, this hurts me more than it hurts you.
Taking away their toys.
Taking away their toys is another good example. I mean, it doesn't have to be physical. If I just take this away from you and say, no candy in the class. And I didn't tell you why or what the reason was, because the wrapper makes too much noise and it's disruptive, or you're going to get hyper, or whatever it is. I haven't taught you anything about it, so it's still just punishment taking it away, right? As opposed to a teachable moment. Guys really have a hard time understanding that, but once they get it, they get it. And so you'll hear in my office as I sit, and sometimes I hear the dads pass. It's like, don't run in the hallway, because if you run in the hallway, you might fall. And so I'm like, yeah, they're getting it. It's a teachable moment, right?
My
Yes, sir.
dad has a smoking issue. How can you stop smoking?
So if you were going to teach your dad, you would say, not just stop smoking because I don't like the smell. Stop, well, I guess you could say that too, but stop smoking because it's unhealthy for you, and I love you, and I want you to be around. And so again, teaching with that whatever you're gonna do.
Okay.
I'm going to go through, because I think most people get domestic violence and substance abuse, and talk a little bit about the last three, communicating needs. Men have a very hard time communicating our needs. Women can, they're a little bit more expressive at what they want. We think that you should know what I want, right? I tell the story, one of the guys in the group one night, he came in and he said, I planned this event for my significant other. I told her we were gonna go out, paint the town red, we're gonna dancing and dinner, and he was really excited about it, he made all the plans. His significant other got off work a little earlier than he did, and so she was home when he got home. And instead of, well, what he said was, did you cook? And she went ballistic. She was like, what do you mean did I cook? I went to work today just like you did. How come you can't come home? Blah, 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 right? But what he meant was, I hope you didn't cook because remember we're going out to eat tonight. Now, had he communicated what the information that he needed correctly, it would have been a whole different night. He might have even gotten lucky that night, right? But he didn't communicate, so they went to bed mad and the night was ruined, right? So we work with guys in communicating exactly what you want and doing it in a way where you're respectful to the other person. And again, a lot of this stuff, these guys are not taught. Most of the guys, just like Dr. Smith said about her father not being around. My father, I told you my father wasn't around. So how am I going to be the perfect dad to these three kids? And I've never seen it modeled. And so we give them tools, not in a negative way, like a deficit, like you've done something wrong. This is just new information for you. So we're giving you information to parent in a different way. Rites of passage, how many of you guys have heard somebody say he's the man of the house? A little boy, right? There's no damn way that a 12-year-old could be the man of the house. And I hear it a lot. And what happens is he takes on the role as the man of the house at 12, and he doesn't get to be a little boy, he doesn't get to be a teenager or an adolescent or a young adult or a young man. And then he turns 18, moves out of the house, and what does he start doing when he gets his own house or his own family? He starts acting like a little boy, right? He does things that he should have done at 12, he starts trying to do at 22. And that's what happens again. They fall into substance abuse and doing stupid childlike things because they weren't allowed to grow up. So we advocate for a rite of passage from boyhood to manhood. So a lot of this is just with the boys. We'll talk about the daughters a little later. But very, very important because we think that if we talk about this rites of passage now, they'll be there for their sons to make sure that they understand that package, and then they won't be our future clients, right? Last one is choosing a healthy mate. Not being vulgar, but most of the guys that come to class, first thing we say is, okay, describe because there's three parts of the program for it. It's responsible parenting, healthy relationships, and financial literacy or economic stability, right? So under the healthy relationships part of it, we ask them, describe the perfect mate for you. They were like, oh, she's gifted, or she's gifted. I'm like, okay, well then describe the perfect mother of your children. Oh, she has beautiful brown hair, and she has, she's intelligent, and we're like, but that needs to be the same person, because what you're describing, and that's why you have multiple mothers of your children, but they're all the same type. You've continued to pick the same type of person, gifted, right? But she's not gifted, so you need to merge those. You need to merge those two people to find not only somebody who you're physically attracted to, but who's also going to be the perfect mother or stepmother or role model for your children. Very important, the last one for you. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Areas of focus as we talk about a trauma-informed approach, right? Call these the man rules. Masculinity and sexuality, trauma, and bias. We're going to go through each one of these, right? So the worst thing we can do, and the worst three words that are most destructive three words that every man hears when he's a boy is be a man. Name some other words you think that you've heard or heard your parents say to other boys.
Suck it up.
Suck it up.
Don't cry.
Don't cry. Man up.
Yeah.
What else?
Boys will be boys.
Curse.
Don't curse, yeah? Boys will be boys. Those things are traumatic experiences to boys. So I remember, and I can say this because I've been in group and I'm so secure in who I am, it doesn't matter. I remember I used to always stand on one foot. Just put all my weight on one foot and stand like this. And my mother used to say, quit standing on one foot. The girls stand on one foot. And she said it a lot. So every now and then, I can say that to you guys, but it still bothers me because I can catch myself. I'll be somewhere and I'll be standing on one foot and I'll like she's around or something. But it was traumatic because I didn't want to be labeled a sissy. I didn't want to be labeled a girl. And by her saying that really triggered me off. And so I had to catch myself because my little boy, he's through in daycare. There's a lot of learning around, and they stand like this. And so sometimes I catch him and he's standing like this, and I'm like, put your hands down. And then I say to myself, why are you telling him that? So he can conform. But we have to be careful in allowing them to express their masculinity and or sexuality in a way that's healthy. And it starts very, very early. This photo was viral for a long time. How many people remember it? No?
I know him, but.
So it was in Creed. It was in the movie Creed. And this was the director or the producer, the other guy. And it was in a Mail magazine or online. Well, it was in a Mail magazine, but then it went online. And particularly the African American female population went berserk. They did not like that they were touching and hugging, and it was just too homophobic for them. It was, it was crazy, the things that were said. At the same time, there was, someone took a picture of a Glamour magazine or whatever, where there was 6 models and they were all darn near naked, but they were laying on each other's thighs, and they were saying, oh, how beautiful is that? But we create in our society what masculinity has to be. To me, this is cool. This is like, we made it, bro. You know, we did the damn thing, right? But it's unfortunate that they weren't allowed to express that. What do you see here?
Looks like pain. Looks like pain.
Pain?
Like anguish.
One person trying to comfort the
Yeah.
It's
other.
comforting. This was in DC. He had slipped in these steps. This is a total stranger. And the guy was in shock and freaking out, and this stranger was just holding him, saying it's going to be okay, waiting for people to come, right? Again, when put on out on a survey of what you think about this, most people thought, oh, homophobic, disgusting, you know, men shouldn't be that touchy with each other. But they tell us as kids, be nice to each other, respect, and then when you do it, you get caught up, right? This is kind of one of my favorite big photos. This is 3 generations of love, right?
Wow.
In the African American community, kissing's not so, even with your daddy. I mean, like my son is 3, about 4 or 5 people, if I still continue to kiss him, I'm going to. But people will start looking at me a little funny, right? But because we are not allowed to express emotion in this way, we tend to do it other ways. So then we act out, right? You guys know what I'm talking about? Okay. I think there's one more. No, it's not. So we talked about masculinity and sexuality, which is really important, and other, if you're interested in that a little more, send me an email and I'll give some more information on that. But I'm going to switch to trauma, because this is the one thing that particularly men of color, it prevents them from parenting in a meaningful way. The example that I use is the government and a lot of systems, as they're working with fathers, the main thing they're focused on are jobs, right? Oh, we got to get you a job. We got to put you in job training. We got to make you a carpenter if you're not in school and classrooms. And they don't address the trauma. For me, it's very hard. I'm going to use my friend here, Johnny. To get Johnny a good job, if Johnny hasn't dealt with the fact that his mother was a prostitute, his dad was in jail all of his life, his older brother sold drugs to make sure that the family ate, and Johnny is struggling with his sexuality. If he hasn't addressed all of that trauma, the best job in the world is not going to help him. And then again, kind of where I was going earlier, you want me to be the best dad. The commercials on TV now with the federal government are take time to be a dad, or it only takes a moment. And those are cute commercials. But the population that they're targeting them to are individuals that have so much trauma that they can't move past that to get help. And so in our groups, what we're doing, what's bothering you? What's preventing you from getting what you want out of life? What do you want? And that's not a question that most people ask. What are you going to do to make my job easier? Or is what professionals do, right? So we really spend a lot of time talking about trauma and coming at it from a trauma-informed approach. Now these are what I call the man rules. The man rules are what society says I have to be. Society says I have to always be in control if I'm a man, right? I'm a real man, right? I can't cry. I don't ask for help. I shouldn't show emotion. I have to be the Mandingo, Superman, drop it like it's hot guy in the hood, right? I don't show weakness. I have integrity, responsibility, and provider. So the moment I get into any type of trouble and I have some counseling or I enter any type of program, they tell me the complete opposite. So then, and my counselor or my therapist is telling me, stop trying to always be in control. Let it go. You don't have to be in control. Well, the moment I step out of therapy, I go back into society, and now I'm told again, be in control. So we have, from a trauma-informed approach, we have to be able to navigate the middle, right? So I'm told not to cry, but if you come to Project Fatherhood, we create a safe space for you to come in here and cry. And they can do that, right? But what happens after group? If those same, and I'm talking about, we got thugs, right? We got guys with tattoos, and they come in there, all that. Those same guys can't go, even though they got all that good information in group, they can't take that outside into the world, right? So we have to treat them with an approach that says you need to be who you want to be and learn how to navigate that in the outside world, right? Be a sexual Superman. If I'm not, or don't pretend or portray that I'm a suave, a Rico Suave type of guy, I'm labeled a what? Gay, sissy. So I have to learn how to navigate the middle so I don't let society tell me what to do, but I also get the help that I need, right? So on and so forth down the line. Make sure I have time there.
Can we grab a few more? Do you mind passing back a few handouts, maybe 4 of your
Oh, sure.
handouts? Thank you.
Absolutely. Oh, that's back for me. So we were just talking about this. This is what we call man box. So inside the man box is what society and most people, and a lot of times women put this on men, right? We want you to be strong and tough and hard and in control and athletic, and anytime you're not any of that, you're queer, fag, homo, chump, weak, gay, da-da-da-da, right? So we have to make sure that guys understand that the man box needs to be created by the man, by you. You get to be who you want to be. It's not necessarily what society, the man rules say that we have to be, right?
That's
I'm sorry? Question?
no.
Okay. So how we address that trauma depends on our bias, right? And first of all, we have to acknowledge that we all have them. Anybody in here don't have a bias? Okay. So I start off saying this topic because recently this happened to me. Actually, it's about 6 months ago. But I go to the gym at 4:30 in the morning. I was coming home from the gym, had to be about 5:15. And I was taking a colleague to lunch, so I needed to get some cash from the ATM before I went home and showered and went to work, right? So I pull into this Wells Fargo, and like most, there's the front door, and then there's an ATM on each side, right? So I pull right up in the middle, and unconsciously, first of all, I observed all these kids, young guys out 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, what's going on here, right? But what the reality is that there was a group of kids on the left, and they happened to be all Caucasian, and on the right, they were African American and Latino. And without even thinking, in my mind, I said, I'm going to this ATM over here because I can take the white boys. Now, I might struggle a little bit with the brothers or the Latinos over here, so I'm going to go over here with the guys that I know that I can whoop, right? In case they try to jump me, right? Without thinking, that's what I said. The reality is these boys could have been on their way to choir rehearsal, and these guys could have been Kung Fu master, was going to wet my little ass out, right? But that was my bias, because society has told me that the younger white guys can't fight, and you're black, and you're supposed to be able to beat them, and you better watch out for the brothers and the Latinos because they got guns and knives, right? That's what society has told me. So that was an example of my bias immediately. We all have them, and they can have an extreme effect on how we work with families, right? So we're just going to have a safe space here, be very honest, go through a quick exercise. What is the first thing you think about when you see this video? This picture. Blurt it out.
Middle East.
Middle Eastern? Religion? Islamic? Yeah. What else?
9/11,
9/11.
which I hate to say, but
That's the purpose, because I want somebody to be able to tell the truth. Because everybody's, in every group, somebody's thought about it, but nobody will blurt it out.
I was younger.
The first bias is terrorist,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we have to acknowledge that this day and age, that's what that reminds. Doesn't mean that's what he has to be, but I have to acknowledge that society has painted a picture and pushed a bias on me that this guy might be a terrorist because he has religious wear on, right? It's actually a wedding, he's a great guy, all that, right? What about this one? I'm sorry.
Can I just comment on the previous picture?
Sure, let's go back.
I think, I agree with you that we have our biases, but it's interesting because how it's affected by your own experience.
Mhm.
I grew up in Indonesia where majority are Muslims. So when I see that, I didn't think of Paris. I think of, oh, it must be a party. That woman's wearing bracelets and then the clothes.
You're right.
So what bias for me, it may not be a bias for you.
Right,
That's-
I'm glad you said that, because that bias is not all of ours, but I guarantee you somebody in the room has that
Right,
bias.
right.
And in every group there is, but most people don't say it right away. I gotta pull it out of the room that somebody thinks first thought was terrorist, right? So
But I
let's,
think it could be dangerous for me to sometimes assume that my bias may be yours,
absolutely,
and it affect how I communicate with you.
yeah. And if I have that bias, and this father is coming into my office, I already got an attitude, right? So I'm less likely to help him or his kids in a way that he needs help based on my stupid bias, right? And so I'll tell you at the end of this. What about this picture?
A convict.
I like that.
Sports?
Yeah, athlete.
He's a professional football player. But when I first saw it, I said he looked a little cray-cray. That's what I thought. Something's wrong with him. Look at them eyes. They're all, but that's me, you know? But I'm glad that somebody said convict, because most people, oh no, he looks like just a guy who, no, let's be real. And understand how some people might be scared of him based on his appearance. So when I get a call from a father who says, my social worker is really giving me a hard time, I said, okay, you know what? Tomorrow I'm gonna go with you. And when I go, I can see that immediately, oh, she has a bias. Either some man has treated her wrong, and she's taken out on him, or if she's not of color, 9 times out of 10, she's offended or scared of him. And so I work with him then how to win her over to his side, to work with her bias to his advantage, right? Let's go. What about this guy?
Homeless.
This guy's a millionaire. Got more money than all of us put together. But because of his appearance, we've created what he is or should be, right? Last one.
Inmate in jail?
Inmate in jail?
Yeah.
You said my cousin? I was doing a presentation yesterday and somebody said that. Y'all are related.
Gangbanger.
Gangbanger?
Yeah.
Thug?
Rapper.
Huh?
Rapper.
Rapper. In yesterday's class, somebody said fine. But this guy, he's a mental health therapist.
Wow.
They're at the tennis courts over at Echo Park, Temple and Alvarado by our offices. They were playing basketball, and he pulled off his shirt because he was younger, got lots of tattoos, but no criminal record, not affiliated with a gang. One of the homeboys though, right? So we have to watch our bias. And I talk a lot about bias because I have one. So my mother and father separated when they were 3. The last thing I remember about my biological father was him hitting my mother upside the head with a bottle. Today I can see it like it was yesterday. I could see blood running down my mother's face and her screaming, saying, let me just get my baby so we can go, right? That's the last thing I remember. So I don't have very positive feelings about my father. My grandmother taught me, you respect your elders, honor thy mother and father from the Bible, all of that stuff. So when I see him at family funerals or events, hello, sir, how are you? And I just keep it moving, right? But that's a bias. So DV is a bias for me, and I have to be very careful. What percentage of the guys, based on the population I told you I work with, what percentage do you think of the guys have some type of DV issue?
90.
How many?
90.
90% of the guys that walk through the doors of my office, and I read every case file before I assign them to a client. So I've read their minute order, I've read the police report, I see how he's bashed her in the head and she's been in the hospital. But I still have to check my own bias, because that's why they're here. They're here to get help. So I have to check my bias and say, you have a bias against male perpetrators. So when I go out to shake his hand and welcome to Project Fatherhood, and I hope we can help you and your family, I have to put all of that behind me. But because if I didn't, I can go out there, because in my mind, what I want to say, this mom, that's what I want to say, but I have to make sure that I check my bias. So I talked a little bit about these merge groups before, and they call them merge, meaning men in relationship groups. And these groups have proven, and people ask me to come speak from across the country, have proven that this is a different way of engaging men in a trauma-informed way than other programs. 92% of the guys that come into the program to reunify with their children are successful. So they come in there, they're very angry when they come. We treat with a trauma-informed approach and say, listen, I get that you're mad at her, you're mad at your social worker, but you can't come in here calling her a B. We don't want to hear that. We're going to teach you how to navigate to improve the outcomes for your kids. First week, they're like, yeah, whatever. By the second or third week, they're like, okay, I get it. And sometimes they'll say, oh, my social worker changed, her attitude changed. No, you changed. The way you look at how you approach these systems and your ex-wife, the mother of your children, because we're teaching, she could be crazy as all get out. But if you want a relationship with your child, you're going to have to learn how to make that crazy work for you, right? And so those groups are great. People are asking us across the country to try to train them on working with men. So we have a couple of things that happen. I usually get into a debate or an argument with somebody with a lot of letters behind her name because our groups are male facilitated. We believe that men learn from men. Not that women can't do it, but if I got some problems going on downstairs, you know what I mean? I don't care how many letters you have behind your name or what a good therapist, I'm not going to talk about it. That's how, that machismo that I talk about, that's how I was raised. Since here, you don't talk about certain things around women, you don't do it. If we were in this class and, I'm sorry, your name again? Darissa was coming through the door and she had all these boxes. Sergio and I would break our necks to come over and help her get through the door and navigate it, right? But if Josh came through the door and he was having problems, we were like, brother, better get in where you fit in. I'm not getting up, right? We're conditioned from early on to treat women differently, right? And so I don't understand how people won't think that that would affect what goes on in your group. We may not want to sleep with you. But the reality is the moment you walk through the door, everything changes. We sit up. There you go. We sit up differently. We vie for your attention. I don't want to sleep with her, but I want her to look at me before she looks at Sergio. Really, I mean, that's how we are. That's how we're conditioned. And so in these spaces, we eliminate that factor. And so they're male-facilitated groups with confidentiality and a little security. All that said about those groups and how fantastic they are, it's not the end-all, be-all. We know that there's other things that they need. So in addition to those merge groups, we also offer individual and family counseling. So that's when we bring the mother in and the children. And then we also, at that point, bring in female therapists because we want their perspective, right, as we work with the family. I talked about employment and job training. It's important because you don't feel like a man if you can't take care of your job. Take care of your family, right? So we want you to get a job, but we also want to make sure that you address that trauma and all those things that are going on with you, because we want Sergio to be, you're going to get a prize at the end of the day. In every class, there's one or two guys in the class, and we kind of bond. So financial literacy, you'd be surprised of, because of how we were raised, because of the examples that we've seen when we were raised, how many of us don't have checking accounts? Or know what interest is, or how to use credit to our advantage. And so those are foundations of the program. We make sure that guys understand financial literacy so they can be daddy. If I want to feel like daddy, I got to be able to pay the rent, Healthy relationship classes. So most of us meet somebody, we have sex, and now we're a family. It doesn't work like that. Most of the guys don't even really know the mother of their children. They've never really dated. With guys who have multiple children by a woman, and they never actually have went out on a date. So my staff and I will flip all these tables around, we'll put on a white shirt and black pants, cater in some food, and we'll become waiters, and we'll make them go on a date. So we'll flip these two tables around, and you guys will be forced to talk for an hour, not about your kids, not about work, get to know each other. What we find out is they actually like the person. Next are parent-child enrichment activities. I remember going to events where all the adults would be on one side of the park or in the room, and the kids would be on one side. They'd be drinking Hennessy and playing dominoes, and the kids would be playing games, right? We never did anything together. So once a month, we have activities that require that the fathers spend time with their kids. And it's not about you going out making money and taking care of the bills, it's just spending time with your kids. Again, damn, I like my kids. I never really thought I liked them, because you never really spend any time with them, right? Legal workshops and employment assistance. One that's really bad and it's kind of sad right now in LA County, we have a huge problem with housing. You've heard about the homeless thing. But I have like 6 clients right now on my caseload that are sleeping in their cars with their kids. There is no place in LA County where a father could go get housing, because it has to be a female. And if it's a father, I don't care if he has no record. If he's a male, you can't get government housing. Well, now that's the LA County rule, right? Federally, you're supposed to be able to. So half of my job is I advocate to places saying, you need to change the rules, change the policy, and allow this man who has a 3-year-old he's giving her a bath in the gas station and then taking her to school, get her some housing, right? It's pretty sad, so we work with that too. Let's see, so I told you the 3 areas of responsibility: responsible parenting, healthy marriage. It says marriage because I'm a federally funded program, but we want to honor relationships in the communities that we serve. I know a lot of people who've been with their old lady, that's what they call this, my old lady, been with his old lady for 22 years, and just because they're not married, I'm not gonna invalidate their relationship. So we've changed that to, the feds don't know it, so shh. But it says healthy relationships instead of marriage. So we teach these fathers how to develop skills to strengthen those relationships, both with their significant other and their kids. And then lastly, we talked about the economic stability and financial literacy. So all that stuff that I said that our program does,
Time to step it up.
it's time to you're gonna come work for me. It's time to step it up. So I spend a lot of time talking about policy and establishing initiatives, and all that's great, but we really need to start with changing the attitudes of staff. I will escort guys to see their social worker, and like I said, she'll be sitting there with her hands on her hips, look at him. He looked just like Ray Ray. And the guy is screwed from the time he walks through the door, right? And so we're changing the attitude. We're making, so let's just say it was a guy who walked through the college here. The receptionist at the front desk cannot have a bias against men. And if she does, she needs to go. Or if he does, he needs to go. And one of the things that I'll say, just like this room, this is how child welfare, most systems are. They're 90% women and a few guys. So most of my examples are about women, but men are the worst against other men, fathers, right? Because Sergio and I are saying, we went to college, we got our life together, he can do it, he can do the same thing. So we really criticize and hold men to a lower standard, right? But because the field is dominated by women, those are the ones typically that we work with in changing their attitudes. I currently work and do presentations at USC and the Department of Children and Family Services, because in their defense, most of them have never had any training on engaging a big black man who just lost his kids. The only thing they can do is say, ooh, give him an anger management class, right? But you don't recognize, I'm just hurt. You took my kids. I don't need another class. Help me navigate the system. And so rather than waiting until they get their first client and that's the resolution, we're starting to work with them ahead of time. So before they even get their social worker degree, we're giving them male engagement classes and working with men of color classes so that they're prepared before they get on the floor. Inclusiveness of language and environment. We were very successful in changing the language with the Department of Children and Family Services, where every form just said mom. There was not one form that said mom and dad. Nothing is in the, still to this day, most of it's not in the case is not in the father's name. It's all the mothers. The child support's in the dad's name, right? But we were successful in at least adding dad to the form. The same thing in schools. We're actually now, it says mother and father, but we want to change it even further to parent 1 and parent 2 because of same-sex couples. And remember that example where I told you that the uncle was raising his sister's kids? Well, he doesn't like signing forms that say dad. Makes him feel awkward, right? So if he just said parent 1 or parent 2, he might be a little more comfortable being the parent as opposed to the mom or the dad. So we're trying to change that not only in the department, but with LAUSD and all systems, So it's parent 1 and parent 2, right? The types of activities for fathers and the scheduling of activities all mixed together because we know that most of these, especially when you talk about school, when we're talking about preschool and all that things, they hold meetings at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Well, how many of us can go if you're working, right? I couldn't. So when my kids went to Dorsey High School, when they were there, luckily I did have a job where I told my boss, when I gotta go, right? But I was the only male. I was the only English-speaking person there because the schools don't want anybody who knows what they're doing. They want people who just sign the sign-in sheet, right? And so we're looking at making it mandatory that they change these activities where times where dads can participate. If you want, and they all scream, parent involvement, parent participation, but the times are at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday. So now we're changing it so it's 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, so more fathers can participate, right? Media and communications. How many of you guys have seen that commercial? The girls are double dutching outside their Brickstone, and the dad's coming home from work with his briefcase, and he starts double dutching with his little daughter. It's cute, right? But I work out in Watts. The brothers in Watts aren't double dutching. So we want media and communication that reflect the communities that we serve. So if you want this commercial to say, oh, you know what? As a dad, I can do that. Then make it realistic. Not to say that they didn't try, but it just wasn't realistic. So we're looking to work with the federal government to make an ad campaign that represents the communities that we serve. And then we talked a little bit about this, the presence of male staff and volunteers. It's really hard. We know that men feel comfortable in spaces and places where they see, most of us feel comfortable when we see ourselves, right? How many people of color have been into a place where there was nobody that looked like you and it was very uncomfortable? It happens to me a lot. And so when I see somebody who looks like me, I gravitate to them. I'm like, hey girl, what's going on? Where you from? You know, it just makes me feel comfortable in certain spaces. And so we want the presence of men to be there. Part of my job is I get hired to do assessments of organizations. Remember that doctor that I told you about? I have a contract with him now that every 4 months I go back and train all of his new staff on male engagement. So that doesn't happen to anybody else. And so I go through organizations like, let's just say this university hired me. I would walk through the front doors to the administration and I'd start looking. Are there any pictures of men? Are there any pictures of, because in child development you might see pictures of mama and her little boy, but do you see any with dads? So what's that picture of that? There's some dads over there, that's good. Yes, but that's the kind of thing I do. There's pink flowers all over the wall. What man would be comfortable sitting in here? Let's just make sure that it's male friendly, and so we do that. Let's see what else we got. So, I'm ahead of myself. In order to really make some significant changes, we have to do training. We train the doctors, lawyers, judges, social workers, so on and so forth. I'm working with LAUSD to get a contract to perform professional development for teachers. So it's required that there is at least 4 hours of father engagement training every year for every teacher so they know how to engage. Because we can't just say you have to engage with men. And if you don't know how, sometimes it can be worse, right? So some type of training where they get male engagement training. It happened with DCFS. After 5 years of struggling with the department, it's now mandatory in their 12-week academy training that they have a full day of fatherhood training. We just started that last month, which was cool.
Quick question, how do you establish the partnerships for those trainings? Because obviously we know that there's a need, but some of those organizations may not identify any. So do you push in or do they
Both.
recruit you?
It depends. So like with LAUSD, I knew that there was a need, so I was knocking down, kicking down doors, right? But some organizations, they'll through the internet or something, like, we need some male engagement training, can you come out and help us? Well, first assess where we are, and that's what I do first, just assess if you're father friendly at all. And it's sometimes you don't recognize it. It's like my own agency. I've gone out and assessed other organizations and made them make changes, and 2 or 3 years into it, I realized that in the first floor of my office didn't have a changing station in the bathroom. Now, what fatherhood agency wouldn't have a changing station in the bathroom? So I don't know, I didn't look in this one, but if there was, I mean, should there be, or do men bring their babies? Do women bring their babies? Should there be a changing station? So those are the things that we would address in looking at the different things. And sometimes I go to places, like I was in Hawaii at a conference, and I was at the convention center, and I noticed that they didn't. And so I went to the convention center office, and I said, this is my work, this is what I do, and I just realized that you're not very father-friendly here. And of course they went, oh, what do you mean? And then when I pointed it out, they were like, you know what? So 2 years later, now they have a changing station in the bathroom. So sometimes it's just being at the right place at the right time. So what's next? I want to give you guys time for questions. So part of this work is not just me doing multiple speeches across the country, it's training other people how to do it. So I hold semi-annually 5-day training. It's very, very intensive. I put professionals through what our fathers would go through, very emotional. We all have daddy issues, whether they're good or bad. And so we make them address what those issues are. And then they have a little bit more understanding on how a father might feel. So when they engage them, they engage them from a different standpoint. And these are men and women that attend this training, because I know that women, I said it before Beyonce did, women rule the world. Girls rule the world? Girls rule the world, right? Come on, no Beyonce fans? Girls rule the world. Yeah. Girl, there you go. But women make the decisions in most of our circles. And so, like even my executive director, I wouldn't be able to do what I do if she didn't believe in it 100%. Because she has to be the one to sign off to say, when the mayor calls and says, he was down here making an ass of himself and screaming and hollering, she'd be like, well, were you, da-da-da-da-da? And he'll say, no. So that's why he's there. Where in other situations, it may be that, you know, if you didn't have somebody who really believed in what you were doing, then Alan Michael back off a little bit type of thing, right? So I hold systems accountable. So in those trainings, we try to get people who are decision makers, and most times they're women, but we also teach those facilitators of the male groups in there. Ongoing father engagement trainings, I just talked about the ones at DCFS and LAUSD that we're putting together. Parenting Beyond Conflict is a new program that I started. Years ago, I think it was like 9 years ago, there was something that resembled it, but this is working with men and women, making them acknowledge that they have to learn to get along for the sake of their child. I don't care if you hate each other. Little Timmy needs to think we're the best of friends in his parenting, so you're parenting beyond the conflict that you have with each other. And so we bring in males and females. Sometimes it's ordered by the court when they have custody issues. He won't let me have on this thing. He won't let me have that. So the judge will say, well, you go to Alan Michael. He has a parenting beyond conflict class. And so we make sure that they understand the importance for the child that they get along, right? Head Start and school involvement. For the last 30 years, they've been trying to integrate fatherhood work into early childhood, child development and Head Start, and no one's been successful at it. So we're taking another go at it, just from a different approach, because the approach that we've used in the past have always been like we did with the moms. We changed mommy and me to daddy and me and hope it works. So we're looking at it a little different, and we're not going in starting programs. We're just doing what I said at the beginning, creating trust and rapport with fathers. Hey man, high five, I'm glad you took your kid to school today. That's it, I leave him alone. If I do that 9 or 6, 10 times, pretty soon he's gonna say, hey man, what's your name? Oh, I'm Alan Michael, I run the fatherhood program. You wanna come to my group? Yeah, so we're trying to do it differently. Foster care, I told you most of my work's in child welfare. I have a passion for kids in foster care. It's kind of how I came into the system. I was sent to a meeting, and at that meeting they talked about the number of kids in care. It kind of blew me away, especially African American kids in care. I was like, there are that many kids in LA with no parents? And so I said, I'm going to dedicate my work to trying to change that. And then we do a lot of work with veterans and military, guys who are deployed. They come back and they're trying to be daddy, but you've been gone a long time and mama's been doing everything. You got to work your way back into the family. And so we navigate on how to do that instead of creating chaos.
Not to mention the PTSD that comes from being deployed.
So I'm glad you said that, because those groups, these are all guys who have been in the military, so that it's a place that they can come and talk about their PTSD without being labeled as a fake or a whiner or whatever, which is happening in the outside world. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's a wrap for this part. It is. I want to be able to answer any questions that anybody might have.
Can you tell us a little bit about how, about how fathers are connected to your program to begin with?
Sure. So it started off about 90% of the guys that came into the program were referred from the Department of Children and Family Services. So the reality is that they had their kids taken away from them for some reason, and they were either trying to increase their visitation or regain custody. Over the years, more men have just said, I want to participate so I can be a better dad I didn't have the information, didn't have the tools. I heard about this program, so I just want to be a better dad. And so right now it's about 70-30, 70% referred, 30% just volunteers. So we have groups, we have just groups throughout LA, and then we have specialty groups. So I have a group that is facilitated in the Metropolitan Detention Center. So the prison gives me a list of guys that are 6 months before their, what is it, exit date? Release, there we go, before the release date. And so we work with these guys and say, hey, listen, you're ready to get out in 6 months. We know one of the things that keeps people out of prison is relationships, right? So if you can establish a relationship with your child, not only do they need you, this is a good way to decrease the recidivism rate. So these guys start working with their kids, and they'll say at the end, I'm gonna do everything I can to keep from going back to jail. Or I'm gonna do everything I can to keep from going back into the welfare system. So we have that, we have the veterans group, we have a group of guys who all have children 3 years old or younger, and they're working on the issues of parenting infants. If you were like me, I used to worry I was gonna roll over and kill my baby every night. I'd wake up to make sure they were breathing, feeling on them. It was traumatic for me having an infant child. And so these guys get together and talk about, without feeling weird, what it's like. I'll tell you guys this quick story since we have time. I also, early on with my older children, I had a poop phobia, right? And I could not change my son's pampers. So when my partner was gone, I would have to pay the next door neighbor to come change my son's diaper. 2 o'clock in the morning, I would call her, she would come over, she would change it, and we did it on a poop-to-poop basis, right? So I think it was like $5 for every poop or something. But there's not very many places I could have told that story when it happened, because nobody knew. But if there was a group where I could have shared that, there could have been some people who said, man, I get where you're coming from, because just the smell or the thought, you know what I mean? And so this group does that. These guys, they talk about parenting infants and the challenges that they have around parenting. And then we facilitate a couple of elementary schools, which is to me the best right now, because the principals communicate that the moment these men stepped on campus, the entire environment changed. The presence of men changed the entire school campus, because kids, you know, they looked up at men like, I better not, I could try that with Miss Smith, but I ain't trying it with Miss Brown, right? And so there's less fighting, there's less lifting skirts up, there's less smoking in the bathroom, just because they know that there's men on campus. These guys are called the motivated men. And so they come on their lunch hour and on breaks, and they just walk the campus. And the campuses have changed because of that. What else? Did I answer your original question? Because sometimes I go on.
Yes, you did.
Yes,
What
ma'am.
did you, what were your degrees and how did you get into this work at the Children's Institute?
So it was a fluke. Literally, I went to law school, and I was waiting to find out if I passed the bar, and I just got tired of it. I was working from 7 to 7 in the morning to 7 at night. I wasn't seeing my kids, and so I said I'm going to take some time off, and I homeschooled my sons for about 2 years. And at the end of the second year, it was around Christmas, I said, you guys are driving me crazy. So I took a 2-week temp assignment at the Children's Institute to help with some policy that they were working on in early childhood. And 2 weeks turned into 12 years. I've been there ever since. Again, while I was there those 2 weeks, I went to a meeting, and at that meeting, I heard about this child welfare thing, and I'm like, this is my new gig. Wow. So I knew nothing about child welfare. I don't have a background. I have a master's in public administration, and I kind of used what I knew from there to help kind of shape policy too. But it became my life's work or my passion based on sitting in that meeting and hearing about kids in care.
Wow.
Sorry,
Yes,
how
ma'am.
did you become a single parent, if you don't mind me asking?
How?
Yeah.
Well, the last one is adopted.
Oh, okay.
The 3-year-old was just adopted. Actually, 2 of the kids were adopted. And the first one I was in the military, and it was it's probably too much.
Oh.
It's reality. Other questions? Joshua, nothing for me?
You say,
I knew you had something.
how do you teach, how do you discipline children in a healthy manner?
Right, so that's a good question, because I struggle with that, because I am a believer in spanking. Most people in my agency have a problem with it. They're all psychologists and therapists, and we go round and round, right? But one of the things that I knew that kept me from doing things that I shouldn't have done when I was little is I was afraid of my mama, right? I was afraid of getting a whooping, right?
Yeah.
So to me, logically, that makes sense, you know? If your kids are afraid of you in a way, because I want my kids to be able to say, you guys gonna start fires or stealing, you go ahead. My daddy crazy, so I'm not. I want them to think that. So I've been that way for a long time. But a group of fathers that had some child welfare involvement are the ones who taught me, just try to look at it a little differently. Try to think of discipline outside of spanking. And so for the last 2.5 years, I've been able to do that. I've been able to use some of the methods that were taught to me from guys who had no education. I mean, they were just fathers. And they talked about things like sitting down. The discipline is sitting down like this with your child and just making them talk to you for 15 minutes. Freaks the kids out. They're like, I'm not doing that. Okay, Daddy, I'm sorry. So just trying different things, untraditional, other than the spanking that I used to do before. So it's just, I don't know. That answered your question. Did I answer your question?
Yes, yes.
But the philosophy, I guess, where I was going with that is, in those groups, it's not about us teaching the guys anything. It's all about life experience and what's happened. So somebody will bring something up similar to what he just did, and there's nobody saying, this is the proper way to do it. All the guys in their rooms are saying, man, that happened to me, let me tell you what I did. Or let me tell you what not to do. And then the guys take that and they go back and apply it into their life, and then they come back next week. I use the analogy like church. I go to church and every week I'm like, Lord, please help me be a better person. Stop cussing, please. And so it's like a tune-up, right? These guys come to group every week, and it's almost like AA. They come and they get a tune-up that keeps them from preventing to parent the way that they used to. So they learn ways to control their anger, they learn ways to discipline, they learn ways to keep from putting their hands on other people, and they're successful at it. It's pretty cool. I really enjoy it. And I would end this kind of how I started, and I always tell people to remember that this is less about fathers than it is about kids. Because we know, science has proven, kids have better outcomes when they have fathers and father figures in their lives. And so all the work that we do is just to make sure that, so that's why we work in prisons, because regardless if this guy's a murderer or whatever he is, we're not holding that against his child, and that child still deserves to have a relationship with their father, whether it be through letter campaigns or talking on the phone. You need to have a relationship with your father. And so whenever that's possible, we try to make sure that happens. Thank you so much.
Thank you.